the cold muzzle of a Colt revolver pressed against Wade Harkness's temple, the metallic chill a stark contrast to the sweltering Arizona heat of 1876. He didn't flinch. Death had been courting him for years, and if today was the day they finally danced, so be it. The outlaw holding the gun smelled of whiskey and desperation, a combination Wade knew all too well. "Last words, cowboy," the outlaw sneered, hammer cocked back. Wade's eyes remained fixed on the distant mountains, their purple silhouettes shimmering in the late afternoon haze. "Love's a fool's game," he said flatly, "and I never was much of a gambler." The outlaw's laugh was cut short by the thunderous crack of a rifle shot. Blood blossomed across his chest before he crumpled to the dust, his unfired revolver landing with a dull thud beside Wade's boot. Wade spun around to see a woman lowering a Winchester rifle, wisps of smoke still curling from its barrel. She stood tall against the setting sun, her figure silhouetted, face obscured beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Appears you owe me a life, Mr. Harkness," she called out, her voice carrying across the distance between them. "I do hope you're worth the bullet." Wade studied her as she approached, leading a paint horse behind her. Her riding skirt was practical, not fashionable, and her blouse was trail-worn. This was no town lady playing at adventure. "I don't recall asking for saving," he replied, kicking the dead outlaw's gun away, "and I don't recall asking your opinion on the matter." She extended her hand. "Nora Lawson, I believe you have something that belongs to me," Wade's brow furrowed. "Madam, I believe you've mistaken me for someone else." "No mistake. You're Wade Harkness, former Texas Ranger, now bounty hunter. And you're tracking the same gang that stole my family's fortune and killed my father." Her green eyes flashed with determination. "I've been following you for 3 days, figuring you'd lead me to them. Seems I arrived just in time to keep you breathing long enough to be useful." Wade squinted at her, reassessing. "Your father wouldn't happen to be Judge Lawson of Silver Creek, the very same." He let out a low whistle. "I heard about that nasty business." He picked up his hat, which had fallen during the scuffle, and dusted it off against his chaps. "But this isn't a job for a woman, even one handy with a rifle." "I'm not asking permission, Mr. Harkness. I'm proposing a partnership." She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch. When she emptied its contents into her palm, Wade's eyes widened at the gold coins gleaming in the dying sunlight. "Half now, half when we catch them." Wade stared at the gold, then back at the woman. Her chin was raised defiantly, eyes unwavering. There was something in those eyes, not just grief or vengeance, but a steely resolve that reminded him of himself before the years had hardened him. "It's not about the money," he said finally. "Then what is it about? Justice." The word felt strange on his tongue, almost forgotten. Nora nodded slowly. "Then we want the same thing." Wade glanced at the body cooling in the dirt. The Weaver gang had been leaving a trail of bodies across 3 territories, and the bounty on their leader would set him up for months. But he'd been planning on bringing them in alone the way he'd done everything since leaving the Rangers. "What makes you think I need a partner?" he asked, mounting his buckskin gelding. "Because you nearly got yourself killed by the lowest member of the gang," she replied, swinging easily into her own saddle. "And because I know where they're headed next." Wade raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? They'll hit the bank in redemption by week's end." "My father's ledgers contained details of gold shipments for the next month. That information was among what was stolen." Wade considered this. Working with a woman, especially one with personal stakes, complicated things. But good intel was hard to come by, and he'd been trailing the Weavers for weeks with little progress. "Redemption's a 3-day ride from here," he said finally. "If we push hard, we might make it in time to set up a proper welcome. Then we have an agreement." Nora extended her hand again. Wade looked at her outstretched hand, then passed her to where the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the landscape in hues of fire. Partnering up went against everything he'd taught himself over the years. Lone wolves survived longer. No attachments meant no weaknesses. Love, friendship, loyalty, those were luxuries a man in his profession couldn't afford, yet something made him reach out and grasp her hand firmly. "To redemption, then," he said. "But understand this, Miss Lawson. I work my way, and if you can't keep up or follow orders when they matter, we part ways. No arguments. Agreed, she said, her grip surprisingly strong. And it's just Lawson. Miss makes me sound like I should be teaching children their letters instead of hunting killers. Wade almost smiled, almost. Daylight's wasting, Lawson. We ride until dark. As they set off into the gathering dusk, Wade couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made either the smartest or stupidest decision of his life. Only time would tell which. They made camp that night in a small canyon, sheltered from the wind and hidden from prying eyes. Wade built a small fire, just enough to cook by without attracting unwanted attention. Nora unpacked provisions from her saddlebags: jerky, hardtack, and to Wade's surprise, a small pouch of coffee beans. Real coffee, he asked, eyeing the beans appreciatively. That's a luxury out here. Some comforts are worth their weight, she replied, grinding the beans between two rocks with practiced efficiency. As the coffee brewed, filling the air with its rich aroma, Wade studied Nora Lawson in the firelight. She moved with purpose, no wasted motion. Her hands, though feminine, were calloused from work. This was no pampered society woman. How long has your father been dead? He asked bluntly. If his directness bothered her, she didn't show it. 6 weeks. The funeral was barely over when I started tracking the gang. And your mother? Gone since I was 12. Consumption. Nora poured the coffee into 2 tin cups. Father raised me alone, taught me to ride, shoot, and think for myself, scandalized half the territory in doing so. Wade accepted the cup she offered. And the other half? The other half was too busy trying to court the judge's daughter to notice she could outshoot most of them. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips, quickly fading. Father always said I'd need to be twice as good as any man to be considered half as capable. Seems he raised you right. Wade took a long sip of coffee, savoring the rare taste. But this vendetta of yours, you've thought about what comes after. Revenge has a way of leaving a person hollow once it's done. Nora's eyes reflected the dancing flames. Have you found that to be true, Mr. Harkness, in your line of work? Wade set down his cup. It's not revenge I'm after, it's justice. Is there a difference? Justice serves the law, revenge serves only itself. Wade poked at the fire with a stick. Been a lawman most of my life. Even now, I bring them in alive when I can. Even men like the ones who killed my father, who put a bullet in his head while he begged for my life. The raw pain in her voice made Wade look up sharply. You were there, Nora's jaw tightened, hidden in a secret compartment in Father's study. He made me promise not to come out, no matter what I heard. So I listened to them torture him for the combination to the safe, listened to him die protecting me. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken horrors. Wade had seen enough violence in his 40 years to imagine what she'd endured, trapped and helpless while her world was destroyed just beyond a thin wall. I was a Texas Ranger for 15 years, Wade said finally. Seen what men do to each other over gold, women, grudges. Thought I was making a difference. He stared into the fire. Then came Bitter Creek. Nora leaned forward slightly. I've heard that name. Most have. Ranger company I was with was called to stop a feud between cattle families, turned into a bloodbath, women, children. Wade's voice hardened. Afterwards, I couldn't wear the star anymore. Couldn't stomach the politics, the compromises. At least as a bounty hunter, I choose my own targets. And you sleep better? Wade looked at her across the fire, his face weathered and lined. I don't sleep much at all, Lawson. That's the truth of it. They fell silent then, each lost in private thoughts as the fire crackled between them. Wade finished his coffee and set about checking his weapons, a ritual he performed each night with methodical precision. You should get some rest, he said eventually. I'll take first watch. I can take a shift, Nora countered. Wade nodded. I'll wake you in 4 hours. As Nora settled into her bedroll, Wade positioned himself on a rock overlooking their campsite, Winchester across his knees. The night was clear, stars scattered like spilled silver across the black velvet sky. In another life, he might have found it beautiful. He glanced at Nora's sleeping form. She'd curled onto her side, one hand near the revolver she'd placed within easy reach. Even in sleep, she was prepared. He respected that. For years, Wade had ridden alone, trusting no one, needing no one. A solitary existence suited him, or so he'd convinced himself. Now, With this determined woman suddenly inserted into his carefully constructed isolation, he felt oddly unsettled. It wasn't just her beauty, though he'd have to be blind not to notice it. It was something else, a sense that her presence was shifting something fundamental within him, like the first tremors before an avalanche. "Fool's game," he muttered to himself, turning his gaze back to the darkness beyond their camp. He'd lost too much to risk his heart again. Better to focus on the task at hand, bringing the Weaver gang to justice, and then parting ways with Nora Lawson, before she became anything more than a temporary ally. Dawn broke with the harsh clarity, particular to desert mornings. Wade, who had eventually allowed himself a few hours of sleep after Nora's watch, awoke instantly, hand already on his Colt. Years of survival had ingrained the habit. He found Nora already up, tending a small breakfast fire. "Coffee's almost ready," she said without turning. "And I've spotted game tracks nearby if you're of a mind for fresh meat." "No time for hunting," Wade replied, rolling his bedding tight. "We eat quick and ride hard. Redemption's still 2 days away if we push." They traveled through rugged country that day, climbing into higher elevations where pine forests replaced the desert scrub. The air grew cooler, scented with resin and wildflowers. Under different circumstances, it might have been pleasant. As they rode, Wade found himself watching Nora's interaction with her horse, a sure measure of character in his experience. She handled the paint mare with quiet confidence, anticipating its needs, communicating with subtle pressure and soft words. The animal responded with trust, navigating difficult terrain without hesitation. By midday, they'd reached a high ridge overlooking a vast expanse of wilderness. Wade reined in, taking a moment to survey their surroundings and consult his mental map of the territory. "There's an old trading post about 10 miles ahead," he said. "We can rest the horses there, maybe gather information." Nora nodded, taking a drink from her canteen. "You've been quiet today, not much for conversation." "So I've noticed," she said dryly. "But I suspect you're thinking about something specific." "The gang," Wade shook his head. "Been wondering why a judge's daughter knows how to track like a Comanche and shoot like a marksman. Those aren't typical accomplishments for a woman of your station." Nora's expression revealed nothing. "My father believed in preparation. After Mother died, he became protective, insisted I learn to defend myself. Most fathers would have hired guards or found you a suitable husband. Most fathers didn't preside over as many murder trials as mine did." She adjusted her hat against the sun. "Besides, I had no interest in being someone's delicate wife." Wade regarded her thoughtfully. There was more to her story, but he recognized the signs of someone guarding painful memories. He wouldn't pry not when he kept his own past locked away just as tightly. They rode on in companionable silence, reaching the trading post by late afternoon. It was a ramshackle affair, a low log building with a sagging porch and weathered sign proclaiming Hanson's trading post and supplies in faded paint. An old man with a scraggly white beard sat in a rocking chair, shotgun across his knees. He squinted as they approached. "Don't get many visitors these days," he called out. "Not since they built the new rail line through Mercy Falls." "Just passing through," Wade replied, dismounting. "Looking to water our horses and maybe buy provisions." The old man, Hanson, presumably eyed Nora with open curiosity as she dismounted. "Well now, ain't often I see a lady out in these parts, especially one traveling with a fella who looks like he eats rattlesnakes for breakfast." Nora smiled politely. "Do you have any fresh food? We've been living on jerky and hardtack. Got some eggs from my chickens out back, maybe some potatoes. Wife might be persuaded to fry 'em up for you." Hanson stood with a groan, joints popping. "For a price, course." While Nora negotiated for food and supplies, Wade casually inquired about travelers on the road to redemption. "Had a group pass through 2 days ago," Hanson said, scratching his beard. 5 men, hard-looking bunch, paid in gold and didn't stint on supplies. Wade's interest sharpened. "Any of them stand out? Man with a scar down his left cheek, maybe." Hanson's eyes narrowed. "You a lawman? Used to be." The old man seemed to consider this. "Yeah, there was one like that. Mean eyes. Treated his horse poorly. A man who's cruel to animals ain't worth spit in my book." "Did they mention where they were headed?" Wade asked. Didn't say outright, but one of them was drunk, talking big about being rich soon. Mentioned something about hitting the mother lode in redemption. Hansen spat tobacco juice into the dust. You hunting them boys, something like that. Hansen nodded slowly. Well, they got about a day's head start on you. Weather holds, you might catch 'em before they reach town. Wade paid the old man extra for the information. Inside the trading post, Nora had arranged for a hot meal and was examining a display of ammunition. The gang passed through here, Wade said quietly, joining her. 2 days ahead of us. Nora's expression hardened. Then we need to leave as soon as possible. We'll rest an hour, eat, and move on. Wade placed a restraining hand on her arm, but we're not rushing and half-cocked. These men are killers. If we're going to do this, we do it smart. Hansen's wife served them a simple but hearty meal: fried potatoes, eggs, and fresh bread with preserved peaches. They ate quickly, aware of the need to make up ground. As they prepared to leave, Nora purchased additional ammunition and a small hunting knife that she strapped to her boot. Wade noticed, but said nothing. She was clearly preparing for a confrontation, and he couldn't fault her practicality. Back on the trail, they pushed their horses harder, eating up miles as the afternoon waned. The terrain gradually descended toward a river valley, the landscape growing more lush and verdant. We'll need to cross at Wilson's Ford, Wade said as they paused to rest the horses. It's the only safe crossing for miles. Is that where you'd set up an ambush if you were them? Nora asked. Wade glanced at her with newfound respect. It was exactly what he'd been thinking. It would be the smart play, narrow approach, high ground on both sides, easy to trap travelers. Then perhaps we shouldn't take the obvious route. Nora studied him thoughtfully. You know this territory. Is there another way? Wade considered the options. There's an old Indian crossing about 5 miles downstream, dangerous this time of year with the spring runoff, the current's strong. But they wouldn't expect us to come that way. No one in their right mind would try it. Wade shook his head. It's too risky. Nora's gaze was steady. I didn't come this far to play it safe, Mr. Harkness. Wade felt a reluctant smile tug at his lips. Back to Mr. Harkness now, is it? Only when you're being overly cautious. She mounted her horse in one fluid motion. Lead on. I'm willing to risk the crossing if you are. As they rode, the western sky bloomed with color, brilliant oranges and pinks streaking across the horizon. It would be dark soon, making the river crossing even more perilous. Yet Wade found himself strangely exhilarated by the challenge, by Nora's fearlessness. They reached the river as the last light was fading. From the bank, they could hear the rush of water over rocks faster and louder than Wade had anticipated. It's higher than I expected, he admitted, surveying the churning water. Spring melt must be stronger this year. Nora dismounted, leading her horse to the edge to let it drink. Can we make it? Wade studied the crossing. In the gathering darkness, he could make out the line of partially submerged stones that marked the ancient ford. The water swirled and foamed around them, but the path was still visible. We'll need to go on foot, leading the horses, he said finally. Single file, step exactly where I step. The current's strong enough to sweep you away if you lose your footing. Nora nodded, her face determined in the fading light. I'll follow your lead. Wade removed his boots and tied them to his saddle, then rolled up his pant legs. Nora did the same, securing her belongings. The water would be ice cold, but wet boots could mean blisters, and blisters could slow them down when they couldn't afford delay. Ready? He asked, taking up his gelding's reins. Ready, she confirmed, her voice steady. Wade stepped into the water, gasping at the shocking cold. The current immediately pushed against his legs, trying to unbalance him. He found the first submerged stone with his foot, testing it before putting his full weight down. Careful now, he called back to Nora. First step slippery. They moved slowly, methodically across the river. The water rose to mid-thigh at the deepest point, the current a constant force threatening to sweep them downstream. The horses snorted nervously but followed their lead, trusting their riders. Halfway across, Wade heard Nora gasp. He turned to see her regaining her balance, one hand gripping her horse's mane for support. You all right? He called over the rush of water. Fine, she replied, though her voice was tight with cold and tension. Just lost my footing for a moment. 3/4 of the way across, disaster nearly struck. Wade's horse shied at something in the water, perhaps a floating branch or the flash of a fish, and lurched sideways, nearly knocking him off his feet. The sudden movement dislodged his bedroll, which fell into the current and was immediately swept away. "Damn it," he muttered, knowing he couldn't chase after it without endangering them both. It was just equipment replaceable, unlike lives. Finally, they reached the far bank, dragging themselves onto solid ground with relief. They were soaked to the waist, shivering in the night air, but they'd made it. "We need to move," Wade said, teeth chattering slightly. "Get the blood flowing again before we catch our death." "Wait," Nora said, rummaging in her saddlebags. To Wade's surprise, she pulled out a small flask. "Medicinal purposes," she explained, offering it to him. Wade took a grateful swallow, the whiskey burning a path of warmth down his throat. He handed it back, and Nora took her own sip, coughing slightly at the strength. "Father always said a lady doesn't drink spirits," she said with a small smile. "But he also said exceptions could be made when one is half frozen. Your father sounds like he was a wise man." He was. Her voice softened with memory. "Stubborn, demanding, but fair. He would have liked you, I think." "What makes you say that?" He respected men who lived by a code, even if it wasn't always the same as his. She recapped the flask and returned it to her saddlebag. "We should move on, as you said." They continued for another hour, putting distance between themselves and the river crossing. The night had turned clear and cold, stars spreading across the sky in countless glittering points. Finally, they found a sheltered hollow where they could make camp without a fire too risky with the gang potentially nearby. As they laid out their bedrolls, Wade noticed Nora shivering despite her efforts to hide it. Without his own bedroll, lost to the river, the night would be uncomfortably cold. After a moment's hesitation, he spoke. "We should share body heat," he said matter-of-factly. "Otherwise, you'll be too stiff to ride tomorrow." Nora looked at him suspiciously. "Is that a proposition, Mr. Harkness?" "It's a practical suggestion, nothing more," he replied stiffly. "But suit yourself." To his surprise, Nora laughed softly. "I was teasing you. Your expression is priceless." Her smile faded, replaced by pragmatism. "You're right, of course. It would be foolish to risk illness when we're so close to our quarry." They arranged the remaining bedroll, and Wade positioned himself beside her, maintaining a respectful distance while still close enough to share warmth. He lay rigid, staring up at the stars, acutely aware of her presence. "You can relax, you know," Nora said after a while. "I don't bite." "Force of habit," Wade replied. "Been a long time since I slept this close to anyone." "How long?" The question hung in the air between them. Wade considered deflecting it, as he usually did when conversations turned personal. But something, perhaps the darkness, perhaps their shared ordeal at the river, loosened his usual reserve. 8 years, he said finally, "since Emily died." Nora turned her head toward him. "Your wife?" "Yes." The word came out rough, unused. "Fever took her, nothing to be done. I'm sorry." Her voice was gentle, free of the pity he despised. "We had 10 good years together, more than some get." Wade kept his eyes on the stars. "After she was gone, I threw myself into rangering, took the most dangerous assignments, didn't much care if I lived or died. And now I take bounties. Live day to day, keep moving." Nora was quiet for a moment. "That sounds lonely." "It's simple. Simple works for me." She shifted slightly beside him, her arm brushing his. "Do you ever think about stopping, settling somewhere?" "No point dwelling on what can't be," Wade replied. "This life I've chosen, or that chose me, it doesn't leave room for picket fences and Sunday socials. Because of the danger, because of what I've become." The admission slipped out before he could stop it. "The things I've seen, done, they change a man." Nora was silent for so long that Wade thought she might have fallen asleep. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "My father used to say that the measure of a person isn't in their mistakes, but in how they live with them afterwards." She turned toward him in the darkness. "I think you're a better man than you believe yourself to be, Wade Harkness." Something in her voice, the use of his first name, perhaps, or the quiet conviction, made Wade's chest tighten. He didn't respond, couldn't find words that wouldn't reveal too much of what he was feeling. Instead, he did something he hadn't done in years. He reached out, taking her hand in his. Just that, a simple human connection in the vast, indifferent night. Her fingers curled around his, warm and alive, and they lay that way until sleep finally claimed them both. Morning brought renewed purpose, and a tacit agreement not to mention the intimacy of the previous night. They ate a cold breakfast of jerky and hardtack, packed quickly, and were on the trail as the sun crested the eastern mountains. According to Wade's calculations, they were now ahead of the Weaver gang, having bypassed the main trail by crossing at the dangerous ford. If they maintained their pace, they would reach Redemption by nightfall, enough time to prepare for the gang's arrival. "What's your plan when we reach town?" Nora asked as they rode side by side along a ridge trail. "First, we alert the sheriff," Wade replied. "If he's worth his salt, he'll help us set a trap. And if he isn't," Wade's expression hardened, "then we do it ourselves. I've got a federal warrant for Weaver, gives me authority to deputize help if needed. You think the townspeople will stand with us against armed killers?" "Depends on the town," Wade admitted. "Some places folks have backbone, others they'll bolt their doors and pray the trouble passes them by." Nora adjusted her hat against the sun. "How many men does Weaver usually ride with?" "Full strength, he has about a dozen, but Hansen said he saw 5 at the trading post. The others might have split off, or maybe Weaver's had trouble keeping his crew together." 5 against 2, Nora murmured. "Not ideal odds," Wade glanced at her, having second thoughts. "Not a chance." Her chin lifted defiantly. "I'm just being realistic about our chances." "Good, because this won't be like shooting that lone outlaw who jumped me. These men fight dirty and they won't hesitate to kill a woman." "Neither will I hesitate to kill them," she replied evenly. "Not after what they did to my father." Wade studied her profile, the determination in her jaw, the unwavering focus in her eyes. She wasn't bluffing. This refined judge's daughter had steel in her spine and ice in her veins when necessary. "Just remember," he said after a moment, "killing changes you, even when it's justified." Nora met his gaze. "I'm counting on it, because the woman I was before they murdered my father couldn't survive in this world." Wade nodded, understanding better than most. Violence changed a person, hardened them in ways that could never be undone. He only hoped that Nora wouldn't lose herself entirely to vengeance, as he nearly had after Emily's death. They rode in silence for a time, each lost in thought. The landscape had changed again, transitioning to rolling grasslands dotted with stands of aspen and pine. In the distance, cattle grazed a sign they were nearing civilization. By late afternoon, they caught sight of Redemption, a modest frontier town nestled in a small valley. From their vantage point on the hillside trail, they could make out a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a church steeple, and scattered houses. The silver glint of a water tower rose above the town, and smoke drifted lazily from chimneys. "Bigger than I expected," Nora commented. "Mining town," Wade explained. "Silver strike a few years back brought in people. Bank looks substantial too." He pointed to a brick building on the main street. "That'll be Weaver's target." They approached cautiously, alert for any sign of the gang. The sun was low in the sky by the time they rode down the main street, drawing curious looks from townspeople. Wade headed directly for the sheriff's office, a small building with a weathered sign and hitching post out front. As they dismounted, the door opened, and a barrel-chested man with a silver star pinned to his vest stepped out, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Don't recognize you folks," he said, eyes narrowing as he took in Wade's worn trail clothes and Nora's practical riding attire. "Passing through." Wade stepped forward, keeping his right hand clear of his holster. "Looking for Sheriff Thomas. You found him." The man's gaze sharpened. "And you are Wade Harkness, former Texas Ranger, now working bounties." Wade reached slowly into his vest pocket and produced a folded paper. "I've got a federal warrant for Luther Weaver and his gang. We have reason to believe they're planning to hit your bank, possibly tomorrow." Sheriff Thomas took the warrant, examining it with a frown. "Luther Weaver, nasty piece of work." He glanced at Nora. "And the lady?" "Nora Lawson," she introduced herself. "Weaver and his men murdered my father, Judge Lawson of Silver Creek. I've been tracking them with Mr. Harkness's help." Recognition flickered across the sheriff's face. "I read about that in a dispatch. Brutal business." He handed the warrant back to Wade. "Come inside. We should talk privately." The sheriff's office was sparse but orderly: a desk, gun rack, 2 cells at the back, and a pot-bellied stove in the corner. A young deputy looked up from paperwork as they entered. "Wilson, go make your rounds," Sheriff Thomas instructed. "Then stop by the saloon. Keep your ears open for strangers, but be casual about it." The deputy nodded and departed, leaving them alone. The sheriff gestured for them to sit, then poured 3 cups of coffee from a pot on the stove. "Now then," he said, settling behind his desk. "Tell me what you know." Wade laid out the information: the gang's movements, their likely target, the expected timing. The sheriff listened intently, asking occasional questions that revealed a sharp mind and experience. "The bank's just received a significant gold shipment," he confirmed when Wade finished. "Payment for the miners, plus the monthly payroll for the railroad construction crew working north of here. Prime target, right enough." "How many men can you put together to help us?" Wade asked. Sheriff Thomas sighed heavily. "That's the problem. My deputy and I are the only official law in town. Mayor's been too cheap to hire more. I could round up some volunteers, but..." He shook his head. "Most folks here are miners, shopkeepers, not gun hands." "So it's just the 3 of us," Nora stated flatly. "I didn't say that." The sheriff stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "There's a fella staying at the hotel, bounty hunter like yourself, Harkness. Goes by the name of Cobb, tracked some horse thief here last week. Might be willing to throw in for a cut." "Anyone else?" Wade pressed. "The blacksmith's a former cavalry sergeant, handy in a fight, and there's old Jim Porter who runs the livery, best shot in the county despite being near 70. Thomas shrugged. "Not much, but better than nothing." "We'll need to set up a proper ambush," Wade said, mind already working on the problem. "Let them get inside the bank, then catch them between us when they try to leave. Risk to the bank staff," the sheriff pointed out. "Less risk than letting Weaver's gang open fire in the middle of town," Nora countered. "From what I've seen, they're not the type to surrender peacefully." Sheriff Thomas studied her with newfound respect. "You're not what I expected, Miss Lawson." "Few women are, once you let them speak their minds," she replied coolly. The sheriff laughed, a short bark of genuine amusement. "Fair enough." He turned back to Wade. "I'll talk to the men I mentioned, see who's willing to help. Meanwhile, you two should get rooms at the hotel and keep a low profile. No sense alerting Weaver if he has scouts watching the town." Wade nodded. "We'll need to check the bank too. Layout, exits, sight lines." "I can arrange that," Thomas said, rising. "Bank manager's a nervous fellow, but he'll cooperate once I explain the situation." As they prepared to leave, the sheriff placed a hand on Wade's shoulder. "One more thing. There's a young woman works at the bank, Catherine Blake, widow. Her husband was killed in a holdup last year. She's skittish around violence now, understandably so." Wade raised an eyebrow. "Your point?" "My point is she doesn't need to see any more bloodshed. None of the townspeople do." His gaze was steady. "If you're planning to turn this into a personal vendetta," he glanced meaningfully at Nora, "I need to know now." "We're after justice, not a massacre," Wade replied firmly, "but these men won't come quietly. Then we make sure the fighting happens on our terms." The sheriff nodded. "Get yourselves settled. We'll meet again after dark to finalize plans." The Redemption Hotel was a modest 3-story building with clean, if plain, accommodations. The clerk raised his eyebrows at Wade and Nora's trail-worn appearance, but asked no questions when Wade paid for 2 rooms in advance with silver dollars. In the privacy of her room, Nora finally allowed herself to acknowledge the exhaustion that had been building for days. She sat heavily on the edge of the bed, removing her hat and running fingers through her tangled hair. Tomorrow would bring either justice or death, perhaps both. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt a strange calm. A soft knock at the door roused her. She answered to find Wade standing in the hallway, his own hat in hand. "Sheriff sent word," he said. "Bank manager will meet us in an hour. I thought you might want to clean up first." Nora nodded gratefully. "Yes, I'd like that. I'll come for you at 5:30 then." As he turned to leave, Nora called after him. "Wade." He paused, looking back at her. "Thank you for everything." She swallowed hard. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know I couldn't have come this far without you." Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion she couldn't quite name. "You'd have found a way. "You're stronger than you know, Nora Lawson." The use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her. Before she could respond, he continued, "Get some rest. Tomorrow will test us both." After he'd gone, Nora ordered a bath brought to her room, an unimaginable luxury after days on the trail. As she sank into the steaming water, she found her thoughts drifting not to the coming confrontation, but to Wade Harkness. The man was an enigma, hard as granite on the surface, yet capable of surprising gentleness. She recalled the feel of his calloused hand holding hers under the stars, the quiet strength in his voice when he spoke of his late wife. There was pain there, deep and unhealed, but also a capacity for compassion that he seemed determined to deny. Nora had not expected to find such a man when she set out on her quest for vengeance. She had expected to feel nothing but the cold satisfaction of retribution. Instead, she found herself experiencing emotions she'd thought buried with her father: hope, connection, possibility. "Foolish," she murmured to herself, submerging deeper into the water. Tomorrow they would face killers. There was no guarantee either of them would survive. And even if they did, Wade had made it clear he wasn't looking for attachments. Yet as she dressed in the cleanest clothes she had remaining, Nora couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach at the thought of seeing him again. It was more than gratitude, more than the bond forged through shared danger. It was something she wasn't ready to name, not yet, perhaps not ever. Wade was waiting in the hotel lobby, freshly shaved, his clothes brushed clean of trail dust. For a moment, Nora was struck by how handsome he was when not scowling, the strong line of his jaw, the intelligence in his gray eyes. "You look," he began, then seemed to think better of whatever he'd been about to say. "Ready," he finished awkwardly. "As do you," she replied, fighting a smile at his discomfort with compliments. They walked side by side to the bank, maintaining a professional distance, though Nora was acutely aware of his presence beside her. The town hummed with early evening activity, miners coming off shift, shopkeepers closing up, saloon doors swinging as the night's revelry began. The bank manager, a thin man with perpetually worried eyes, was waiting for them along with Sheriff Thomas. He unlocked the doors with shaking hands, glancing nervously up and down the street, as if expecting Weaver's gang to appear at any moment. "Mr. Phillips has agreed to show you the layout," the sheriff explained. "I've told him about our plan to let the gang enter, then trap them inside." "I still don't like it," Phillips fretted. "What about my staff? What about our customers? We'll clear the bank early," Wade assured him. "Your tellers can leave, all except one or two volunteers who understand the risks. As for customers, you'll post a notice about limited hours tomorrow. Simple enough." The manager didn't look convinced, but he led them through the bank nonetheless, pointing out exits, the vault, teller positions. Wade asked precise questions about sight lines, cover, the building's construction. Nora noted how methodical he was, leaving nothing to chance. "The vault has a time lock," Phillips explained, showing them the heavy steel door. "Set each night when we close, only opens at 9 the next morning." "What time does the bank normally open?" Wade asked. 8:30. "But the vault remains closed until 9. Wade nodded. "Perfect. The gang will have to wait if they want the main prize. Gives us more control over the situation." As they concluded their tour, a young woman emerged from a back office. She was petite, with auburn hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, her movements precise and economical. When she saw the sheriff and strangers, she faltered momentarily before composing herself. "Catherine," Sheriff Thomas said gently, "these are the folks I mentioned. They're here to help us with our situation." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "The bank robbery you're expecting. We're trying to prevent bloodshed," Nora said, stepping forward. "But we need brave people to help us set a trap." Catherine's gaze shifted between them, lingering briefly on Wade. "My husband died trying to be a hero during a robbery," she said quietly. "Shot in the back while running for help." "I'm sorry for your loss," Wade replied, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy," Catherine continued. "I'm telling you because I want to help. I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of these men thinking they can take whatever they want without consequences." Sheriff Thomas looked concerned. "Catherine, I don't think I know every inch of this bank," she interrupted. I know which floorboards creak, which windows don't lock properly, which desk drawers hold letter openers that could serve as weapons in a pinch. Her voice remained steady. Use me. A heavy silence followed her declaration. Finally, Wade spoke. It's dangerous, he said bluntly. These aren't ordinary bandits, they're killers. So was the man who shot my Robert, she replied. Yet here I am, still breathing, still fighting. Nora felt a surge of admiration for this quiet widow with steel in her spine. We need someone who can act natural when they first come in, she said. Someone who won't panic or give away the trap. I can do that, Catherine assured them. I've faced armed men before. I know how to appear compliant while looking for opportunities. Sheriff Thomas sighed heavily. I don't like it, but I won't insult you by saying you can't make your own choice. He turned to Wade. Your call, Harkness. You're leading this operation. Wade studied Catherine thoughtfully. One condition, he said finally. When I give the signal, you take cover immediately. No heroics, no revenge. Just get yourself somewhere safe and stay there until it's over. Agreed, Catherine said without hesitation. They spent another hour refining their plan. The bank would open as usual, but with minimal staff and a guard at the door turning away most customers with excuses about limited services. Catherine would work her regular position. Wade and the sheriff would conceal themselves in the manager's office, which offered a clear view of the main floor. Nora, against Wade's initial protests, would position herself upstairs in a small storage room overlooking the bank floor, rifle at the ready. The bounty hunter Cobb, the blacksmith, and old Jim Porter would take positions outside, covering the exits. Once the gang was inside and committed to the robbery, they would spring the trap, cutting off escape routes and forcing a surrender or a final stand. It's a good plan, Sheriff Thomas concluded as they finished. Best we can do with what we have. Wade nodded, though his expression remained grave. Plans rarely survive first contact with the enemy. Everyone needs to be ready to improvise. As they left the bank, night had fully descended on Redemption. Lamplight spilled from windows and piano music drifted from the saloon. It was hard to reconcile the peaceful scene with the violence they anticipated the next day. You should get some real rest tonight, Wade told Nora as they walked back to the hotel. Tomorrow we'll come early. I doubt I'll sleep much, she admitted. Too much to think about. Wade was quiet for several steps. Then, are you having doubts? No, she replied without hesitation. But I am thinking about what comes after, if we succeed, if we survive. After is for after, Wade said, echoing words he'd spoken days earlier. Focus on tomorrow first. They reached the hotel, pausing at the foot of the stairs that led to their rooms. For a moment, neither moved, caught in a strange tension that had nothing to do with the coming danger and everything to do with the unspoken connection growing between them. Wade, Nora began, uncertain what she even wanted to say. You should know, he interrupted, his voice low and intense, that I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe tomorrow, even if it means letting Weaver escape. Nora stared at him, stunned. That's not why I'm here. I didn't come all this way to hide while others fight my battles. I know. A muscle worked in his jaw, but I've lost too many people in my life. I won't add you to that list. Before she could respond, he turned and climbed the stairs, leaving her standing alone with her heart pounding and her thoughts in turmoil. In her room, Nora sat by the window, looking out at the quiet town that would soon become a battleground. Wade's words echoed in her mind. Not just his vow to protect her, but the rawness in his voice when he'd said, I've lost too many people. She understood then that despite his gruff exterior, despite all his talk of being better off alone, Wade Harkness cared for her, and that realization terrified and elated her in equal measure. Focus on tomorrow first, she whispered to herself, turning away from the window. Tomorrow would determine everything: justice, vengeance, survival. After was for after. Dawn broke cool and clear over Redemption, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. By 7:30, Wade and Nora were positioned with the others, the trap set and waiting for its prey. From her vantage point in the upstairs storage room, Nora had a clear view of the street through a small window. She watched as the town came to life: miners heading to their shifts, a delivery boy carrying bread from the bakery, shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts. Normal life, oblivious to the danger approaching, the hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. 8 o'clock, 8:30. The bank opened, though true to plan. The guard at the door turned away most customers with apologies and explanations about limited service due to an audit. 9 o'clock came, and with it, the unlocking of the vault. Catherine Blake moved with calm efficiency below, handling the few transactions allowed, giving no indication that anything was amiss. Nora marveled at the woman's composure. At 9:10, Nora spotted them 5 riders approaching from the east, moving at an unhurried pace that nonetheless carried purpose. Even at a distance, she recognized the man in front from descriptions. Luther Weaver himself, his scarred face visible even from her position. She tapped twice on the floor with the butt of her rifle the agreed-upon signal. Moments later, the last civilian customer was ushered out, and the guard locked the door behind them, then slipped out the back to take up his position. Nora steadied her breathing, sighting down her rifle as the men dismounted in front of the bank. They tied their horses casually, as if they had legitimate business inside. One man remained with the horses a lookout. The other 4 approached the door. Through the window, Nora could see Weaver's face clearly now, the jagged scar running from eye to chin, the cold calculation in his eyes. This was the man who had tortured her father for information, who had put a bullet in his head when he refused to reveal her hiding place. Hatred surged through her, hot and clarifying. The lookout gave a signal and Weaver tried the bank door. Finding it locked, he knocked imperiously. After a calculated delay, Catherine approached and unlocked it, admitting them with a polite smile that betrayed nothing. The trap was sprung. What happened next unfolded with the unstoppable momentum of an avalanche. Weaver and his men spread out in the bank, one moving to cover the main entrance, the others approaching the counter where Catherine stood. Words were exchanged. Nora couldn't hear them, but she saw Weaver's expression harden, saw him draw his revolver and pointed at Catherine. That was the signal. Wade and Sheriff Thomas burst from the manager's office, guns drawn. Simultaneously, shots rang out from outside. Cobb had eliminated the lookout. "Drop your weapons." Wade's command carried clearly to Nora's position. "You're surrounded, Weaver." Instead of complying, Weaver grabbed Catherine, using her as a shield as his men opened fire. The bank erupted in chaos, gunshots, shouting, the crash of breaking glass as bullets found windows and mirrors. Nora took careful aim at one of Weaver's men who had ducked behind a desk. When he rose to fire at Wade, she squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and the outlaw collapsed, clutching his chest. Below, Wade was engaged in a desperate firefight with 2 of the gang members. Sheriff Thomas had been hit. He was down, but still firing from behind an overturned table. Catherine had been shoved aside in the confusion and had taken cover behind the heavy counter. Weaver himself was backing toward a side exit, using furniture and columns for cover as he fired methodically. He was a professional, Nora realized, not panicking, not wasting ammunition, looking for a way out even as his plan fell apart. She shifted her aim, tracking him through her sights, waiting for a clean shot. Just as she began to squeeze the trigger, the door behind her burst open. She whirled to find herself facing the 5th gang member, the one they'd thought was dead outside. He was bleeding from a shoulder wound but very much alive, his revolver aimed at her heart. "Gotcha, little lady," he snarled, blood staining his yellowed teeth. Time seemed to slow. Nora knew she couldn't bring her rifle to bear quickly enough. In that suspended moment, she saw her own death reflected in the outlaw's eyes, and beyond that, the failure of her quest for justice, the escape of her father's killer. The shot that came wasn't from the outlaw's gun. It cracked through the small room with deafening precision, and the man's forehead exploded in a spray of red. As he crumpled, Nora saw Wade in the doorway behind him, revolver still raised, eyes fierce with protective fury. "Are you hit?" he demanded, stepping over the body to reach her. "No," she managed, heart hammering. "Weaver, he's heading for the side exit," Wade cursed, turning back toward the stairs. "Stay here," but Nora was already moving, rifle in hand. Not a chance. They raced down the stairs together, emerging into the main bank in time to see Weaver disappearing through the side door. The firefight had largely subsided. 2 more gang members lay dead, another wounded and surrendering to the blacksmith who had entered from the rear. Sheriff Thomas was on his feet, pressing a handkerchief to a bloody gash on his arm. "Go," he shouted to them. "Don't let him escape." Wade and Nora burst through the side door into a narrow alley. Ahead, Weaver was running toward where the horses had been tied, but the animals had scattered in the gunfire. He veered instead toward the main street. "Weaver," Wade's voice boomed between the buildings. "It's over," the outlaw leader spun, firing twice in rapid succession. Wade dove behind a water barrel, bullets splintering the wood inches from his head. Nora took cover in a doorway, working the lever of her rifle. Weaver turned to run again, but found his path blocked by Cobb, who had circled around from the front of the bank. Trapped between them, Weaver ducked into an adjacent building, the town's general store. "He's cornered now," Wade said, reloading his revolver. "But that makes him more dangerous." "There are civilians in there," Nora realized with horror. They approached the store cautiously, taking positions on either side of the entrance. From inside came a woman's frightened cry, then Weaver's harsh voice. "I've got hostages. Back off or they die." Wade met Nora's eyes across the doorway, his expression grim. "I need to draw his fire," he said quietly. "When he focuses on me, you find an angle." "That's suicide," she protested. "Trust me." His gaze held hers, intense and unwavering. "I trust you." Before she could argue further, Wade called out, "Let the hostages go, Weaver." "It's me you want, the bounty hunter who's been tracking you across 3 territories." "Harkness," Weaver's voice carried a note of recognition. "Thought I recognized you in there. You're persistent, I'll give you that." "More persistent than you know," Wade replied. "I was there when you killed Judge Lawson, saw the whole thing." It was a lie, but a calculated one. Nora realized Wade was trying to shift Weaver's focus entirely to himself, away from potential hostages and away from her. "Then you know I don't leave witnesses," Weaver snarled. "You left one," Wade taunted. "The judge's daughter. She's been hunting you too. She's the one who put a bullet in your man Jackson back in the bank." A stream of profanity issued from the store, followed by the sound of something heavy being knocked over. "Send her in," Weaver demanded. "I'll trade these folks for her." "That's not happening," Wade called back, "but I'll come in, just me. Let the others go and you get a shot at the man who's been dogging you all this time." Silence followed, stretching taut as a bowstring. "Then throw your gun in first." Wade looked at Nora, his intention clear in his eyes. She shook her head frantically, mouthing no. He reached over, squeezing her hand briefly. "When you get the shot, take it," he whispered. Then louder, "I'm throwing in my revolver, Weaver. Then I'm coming in, hands up." Wade tossed his Colt through the doorway. It clattered on the wooden floor inside. "Now, let the hostages out," he called. After another tense silence, the store's door creaked open wider. 2 terrified-looking women and an elderly man emerged, hurrying past Wade and Nora to safety. "That's all of them?" Wade asked the last one out. "Yes," the woman sobbed. "Please be careful, he's crazy." Wade nodded grimly. "When I go in," he murmured to Nora, "circle around to the side window. There's bound to be one. Get a clear line of sight." "Wade," Nora began, her voice thick with fear for him. "After is for after," he reminded her softly. Then, raising his hands above his head, he stepped into the doorway. "I'm coming in, Weaver." As Wade disappeared into the shadowy interior of the store, Nora forced herself to move, racing to the side of the building where, as Wade had predicted, a large display window offered a view inside. Crouching beneath it, she inched up enough to peer through the glass. The store's interior was dimly lit, shelves creating a maze of potential hiding places. She spotted Wade in the center aisle, hands still raised, turning slowly as he searched for Weaver. "That's far enough," came Weaver's voice from behind a counter. Nora shifted position, trying to get an angle on the outlaw leader. She could just make out his shape, partially concealed, revolver trained on Wade. "Seems like your luck's run out, Harkness," Weaver said. "Maybe so," Wade replied calmly. "But then I never did believe much in luck." "No." Weaver chuckled darkly. "What do you believe in, then? Before I put a bullet in your brain," Wade's gaze flickered briefly toward the window where Nora was positioned so quickly that Weaver wouldn't have noticed, but clear enough for her. "I used to say love was a fool's game," he answered, his voice carrying clearly to her. "But lately, I've been rethinking that position." Nora understood. He was telling her he had spotted her. She raised her rifle, sighting through the window at Weaver's partially obscured figure. "That's touching," Weaver mocked. "The bounty hunter found his heart. Too bad you won't live to enjoy it," Wade smiled thinly. "I wouldn't be so sure about that." He dropped suddenly to one knee, giving Nora a clear shot just as Weaver rose to fire. She squeezed the trigger without hesitation. The window shattered and her bullet found its mark. Weaver jerked backward, his own shot going wild before collapsing behind the counter. Wade was already moving, diving for his discarded revolver and coming up ready to fire again. But there was no need. When he cautiously approached the counter, Weaver lay motionless, Nora's bullet having found his heart. Nora rushed into the store, rifle still at the ready. "Is he?" "Dead," Wade confirmed, checking for a pulse. "It's over." She stared down at the man who had haunted her nightmares for weeks, the monster who had murdered her father in cold blood. She had expected to feel triumph, or at least satisfaction. Instead, she felt a curious emptiness, as if a weight had been lifted only to reveal a hollow space beneath. "Nora." Wade's voice was gentle, his hand on her arm bringing her back to the present. "I thought I would feel different," she admitted softly. "Killing never brings what you expect," he replied, understanding in his eyes. "But justice, that's something else entirely. Your father can rest now." "And so can you." The aftermath unfolded in a blur of activity. Sheriff Thomas and his deputies secured the scene, while townspeople emerged from hiding to witness the end of the terror that had briefly gripped their community. The surviving gang member was locked in the jail to await trial. The dead were laid out in the undertakers, their personal effects catalogued as evidence. Among Weaver's possessions, they found Judge Lawson's pocket watch, the one Nora's mother had given him on their wedding day. Sheriff Thomas handed it to her without ceremony, understanding its significance without being told. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the timepiece tightly. By evening, a fragile normalcy had returned to redemption. Wade and Nora found themselves in the sheriff's office, completing paperwork that would document the day's events and ensure the bounty was properly paid. "The bank manager wants to throw you both a celebration dinner tomorrow," Sheriff Thomas informed them, signing his name to a report. "Town's mighty grateful. Could have been a massacre." "Not necessary," Wade replied. "We did what needed doing, that's all." The sheriff shrugged. "Well, the offer stands. Now, about this bounty, split it between the men who helped us," Wade interrupted. "Cobb the blacksmith, old Jim. And something for Catherine Blake, too." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "That's generous. Money's rightfully yours." "I didn't do this for money," Wade said simply. After they'd finished with the formalities, Wade and Nora walked back to the hotel in the gathering dusk. The events of the day had left them both exhausted yet oddly energized, as if standing at the threshold of something new. "What will you do now?" Wade asked as they reached the hotel's porch. Nora considered the question. For weeks, her entire focus had been on finding Weaver and bringing him to justice. She hadn't allowed herself to think beyond that goal. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "The ranch in Silver Creek is still mine. I could return there, try to rebuild what my father started." She glanced at him. "And you? Back to bounty hunting?" Wade was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the street where ordinary lives continued their courses, a shopkeeper closing up, a couple walking arm in arm, children being called home for supper. "I've been thinking about what you asked me," he said finally. "About stopping, settling somewhere." Nora's heart quickened. And I'm tired, Nora." The admission seemed to cost him something. "Tired of drifting, tired of waking up each morning with no purpose beyond the next bounty, the next fight." He turned to face her fully, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. "I told you before that love was a fool's game. I believed that for a long time after Emily died, convinced myself I was better off alone." "What changed?" Nora asked softly, though she thought she knew the answer. "You dealt me a chance I wasn't expecting." Wade's voice was rough with emotion. "Showed me there might be something worth risking my heart for again. Nora stepped closer to him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Are you saying you'd consider coming to Silver Creek?" "Helping me rebuild. I'm saying I'd consider following you anywhere." His hand came up to gently touch her cheek. "If you'll have me." In answer, Nora rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tender at first, then deepened with the release of emotions too long restrained. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads touching. "Is that a yes?" Wade murmured, the hint of a smile playing at his lips. "That's a definite yes," Nora replied, her own smile radiant in the gathering darkness. 3 months later, the ranch house at Silver Creek rang with the sounds of hammers and saws as construction continued on the new additions. Wade wiped sweat from his brow, surveying the progress with satisfaction. The main house had been repaired, the barn rebuilt, and new corrals constructed for the growing herd of cattle. From the porch, Nora watched him work, pride warming her chest. The transformation in Wade since they'd returned to Silver Creek had been remarkable. The hard lines of his face had softened, the perpetual vigilance in his posture had eased. He smiled, more a sight that still made her heart skip. "Admiring the view," he called, catching her watching him. "Always," she replied unabashedly. Wade set down his tools and crossed to the porch, taking the glass of lemonade she offered. "How was town?" "Productive. The bank approved our loan for the new breeding stock." Nora settled beside him on the porch steps, and I ran into Sheriff Miller. "He mentioned they're still looking for a deputy." Wade raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" He seemed to think an ex-Texas Ranger might be a good fit. She nudged his shoulder playfully. "If said Ranger was interested in more stable employment." Wade pretended to consider this. "I don't know. Being a rancher suits me just fine." "You could be both," she suggested. "This place practically runs itself with Miguel and the other hands helping out." Wade took her hand in his expression growing serious. "Is that what you want, for me to wear a star again?" Nora squeezed his fingers. "I want you to be happy, Wade. These past months, watching you rebuild this place with your own hands, I've never seen you more content. But I also know that bringing justice is in your blood. You don't have to choose one or the other." Wade was quiet for a moment, looking out over the land they now shared. Finally, he nodded. "I'll talk to Miller next time we're in town, see what he has in mind." "Good." Nora leaned against him, savoring his solid presence. "Because I have something else to tell you." Something in her tone made Wade turn to look at her fully. "What is it?" Nora took a deep breath, suddenly nervous despite the happiness bubbling inside her. "Dr. Henderson confirmed it this morning. We're going to have a baby." Wade stared at her, momentarily speechless. Then a slow, radiant smile spread across his face, the kind of smile she'd once thought him incapable of. "A baby," he repeated, voice thick with emotion, "due in early spring." Nora touched her still flat stomach, just in time for calving season. Wade's hand covered hers, large and warm and protective. "Are you happy about this?" he asked, searching her eyes. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "Are you?" In response, Wade gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "When I told you love was a fool's game," he murmured against her hair, "I was the biggest fool of all." Nora laughed softly, joy overflowing. "Then we're well matched, because I was fool enough to believe I could find justice alone." Wade pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his own shining with a depth of feeling that took her breath away. "I love you, Nora Harkness, more than I have words to say." "I love you too," she whispered back, still marveling at how natural it felt to hear her new name to be his wife, his partner, the mother of his child. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold, Wade and Nora remained on the porch steps of their home, hands entwined, hearts full, the future stretching before them like an unwritten story filled with promise. For a man who once claimed love was a fool's game, Wade Harkness had learned the most important lesson of all sometimes. The greatest risk brings the greatest reward. And in Nora, he'd found not just love, but redemption, purpose, and the home he'd stopped believing he deserved. As twilight gathered around Silver Creek Ranch, bringing with it the first cool breeze of evening, Wade pulled Nora closer and pressed a kiss to her temple. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, two former lone wolves who had finally found their pack. And that, Wade knew with bone-deep certainty, was a hand worth betting everything on.